are about to experience, Jackson Snyder presents. Direct from the Vero Essene Yahad, a Hebrew Nation radio original program. JSP is a variety show seeking out Jewish and Christian origins, religion, theology and history, and doing so in a fashion that is both educational and entertaining. Welcome to Jackson Snyder Presents.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Vero Essene Yahad. Tonight, we have Tammy back, and she has gone on to visions and revelations. She's got them for us tonight, and this is her final appearance that we know of, and she's going to spread the good news tonight. So, Tammy, no last name. Let's see what you have to say tonight. We're looking forward to it.
All right. Okay, so I wanted to go into my experience of when I surrendered my life, as in, I know that I spoke that I've known the Father. I've always known the Father, in which I have always known the Father. Exactly what I've said in my past videos, but there was a time in my life where I actually made the decision to surrender my life. To surrender my life to Him and truly live and walk and breathe and everything for the Father.
Well, that's a lot different, isn't it? To surrender yourself than it is just to try to do the Christian or the Hebrew walk.
Right. Yes. There's definitely a big difference. And how I lived my life then, and I knew the Father. I continually stayed in communication with the Father, but I didn't know at that time what it meant to surrender. Now, I had mentioned in past videos that I had went to church when I was a young girl, somewhere around the ages of like 7, 8, or 9, where a church bus would come and pick us up. And I didn't get to go every Sunday, but when I did get to go, I would go to the adult church, and and that's when I really started to, I guess, learn of who this Creator, the Father, was, I guess through a church.
You didn't go to junior church? You didn't go to Kitty's church?
No, I went straight to, I had so many spiritual experiences that I really truly could not relate to other children that was my age, or children that, that I went to school with or anything like that. I was definitely, I guess you could consider like an outcast in society, because I had so many spiritual experiences that I knew that there was two separate worlds. There was a spiritual world and there was a physical world that we live in.
And if you were picked up by the bus, then I take it that your parents did not go. If you can call them parents.
No, they never went. They never went. I think it was more of they wanted to get rid of us for a couple hours, kind of a thing. If that makes sense. And that was their break to empty the house out for whatever reason for that time frame. And so I got to, learn some things. Like I was very ignorant of things. Like I really didn't understand. When I went to church, I would hear about the Father's Son, and I really did not know how to incorporate that together, because I had always only spoken to the Father, and that was just the way that it always was. The Son part didn't make sense to me, and so that was never, I was never really, I just didn't put the two and two together. So it wasn't. So now I'm going to go back to the future now, and when I was 24 years old, that's when I surrendered my life, and at that time I was married to my first husband, and I was pregnant for my daughter, and it ended up being a situation where our marriage started to fall apart. Things just weren't going well at all. I was I was still so messed up from just coming, because I met him when I was 19 years old. I had just come out of my home of all that I had just, went through. So I was pretty messed up in my first marriage. I was still pretty messed up in my second marriage. And, but so my first marriage, it ended up, the situation was just so messed up, and it ended up that my first husband had beat the living daylights out of me one morning. And I was 6 months pregnant at the time. He sat on my stomach, straddling my stomach, like crushing the baby inside me. And he beat my head on the wood nightstand, which was this big square wood solid nightstand. And he was going to kill me if I did not stop him. Just put it that way. That man would have killed me. He choked me, and he was completely out of his mind. That was one of the other time frames that I told you I had seen black eyes. His eyes were all black. He was definitely possessed with some kind of demon and trying to kill me. And so he ended up going to jail and that whole scenery. And then
did he remember doing that? Excuse me if I interrupt once in a while. Did he remember taking you down and beating you? Did he remember it?
Well, I think that he did, to be honest with you, but he lied. And he lied to his family for a very, very long time. Nobody believed that he did that to me. And to be quite honest with you, before that situation, he had never laid a hand on me.
Well, it sounds like if his eyes went black, maybe that was an evil spirit in him. And a lot of times when you've got doing something under the influence of an evil spirit, you can't remember, especially if it's not something you would normally do. But so
yeah, well, he ended up futuristically, because I ended up forgiving him and becoming friends with him, because we did have children together. My first two are my oldest son and my second daughter were his children, and I was pregnant at the time with his daughter. So I ended up making peace with him later on, and later on he admitted, that he knew what he had done to me. So I know that he knows what he did to me. And obviously the hospital, when I went to the hospital, they couldn't do an x-ray on me, but I had like several large contusions on my head from him beating me, taking my head and just beating it on the nightstand that was next to our bed. And then I had horrible, not sure what it's called, but where you're off balance. Can't think of the name of it, but there's
vertigo.
A word vertigo. I had horrible vertigo for a good 3 or 4 months after that. It was nonstop every day, all day. I had vertigo. But so anyway, so he went to jail, and I went and I lived at this home that was for pregnant women, young girls, and it was just like a regular house. You'd never even know that this was a home. You walk through the front door, and then you got like 2 or 3 bedrooms on one side of the house, and like the master bedroom on the other side of the house. And we would bunk with other girls, because, there wouldn't, depending on how many girls were there. And we lived there just like it was a normal home. Like somebody would cook every single night. Somebody was assigned, we had rules and everything we had to follow. And that's the place where I ended up surrendering my life, is at that place. The house mom, which was called the house mom, she was a Christian, and every question that I had for her, she had an answer right away. And it just, there was nothing that she couldn't answer. Every question that I had, like, I was so ignorant at that time. I didn't even know that Israel and Jerusalem were a place that still existed today. You know what I mean? And because I wasn't schooled, like I said, I mean, just in middle school alone, I skipped every single day from day one. I skipped every single day. I had straight F's on my report card all through 7th grade and all through 8th grade. And the only reason why they didn't fail me is because I had already failed 1st grade. Excuse me. I had already failed 1st grade and I failed 3rd grade.
That's so hard to imagine as smart as you are.
Well, I wasn't, I was more smart in the spiritual realm. And yeah, I could understand and I could do the work, but I was so all over the place. Like the biggest things, like all through elementary school, I had F in conduct. And the reason why I had F in conduct is I couldn't stay sitting in my chair. I would get up and I would just randomly walk around, or I would be off in space somewhere. Like they would call it daydreaming, but me personally, I know that I was talking to the Father. I was having conversations nonstop with the Father. I never stopped talking to the Father all day long in school, all day at home. I just had this relationship with the Father that was so real to me that, you know, it was the only person I could talk to that I knew wasn't gonna tear me apart or do anything bad, you know. And and I would get caught talking all the time. I would randomly try to talk to somebody else. So I had my report cards for elementary school was F in conduct. We had at that time conduct at the bottom of our report card, and it would always be F. And my teacher would say, Tammy is talking. She won't stay seated in her seat, and she's constantly off in space, daydreaming, you know, not paying attention to class. It wasn't that I wasn't smart enough to do the work. If you want me to be honest with you, I think the Father protected me from all that stuff because it's all just brainwashing children and dumbing them down.
Could well be.
But anyways, it wasn't that I couldn't do the work. And the reason why I think that I was always getting up and walking around, because I find that even now, you know, as a grown-up, if my back starts to ache or I start to feel any type of pain in my body, I just get up and I start walking and it usually goes away. You know what I mean? So what I'm thinking as a small child is I was probably in pain from being beat the day before, and it was really hard for me to just sit there in the seat and feel the pain, you know? So I would get up and just walk because it would help relieve the pain. But anyways, so let me go back to the story. So here I'm 24 years old. I'm living in it was called the Sunlight Home. It was a home for pregnant women. And for whatever reason, I was ready at that time. I now understood, because this lady answered all my questions, that, you know, there's actually an action that we have to make, and we got to surrender. We can have a relationship, but at some point we have to actually surrender ourselves to him. And so I finally got to the point where I surrendered my life. And when I surrendered my life, I'm going to tell you what, right now, when I surrendered my life, I knew that I just went through the most unbelievably most powerful experience, spiritually speaking, that I had ever went through in my entire life. It was so powerful. It was so real. It was so alive. I literally saw as though I had this wedding veil on my head. You know, the wedding veil is where the front of the veil goes over your face. I literally saw a wedding veil lifted up and put up over the back of my head, and all of a sudden I could see. I could see clearly, like I could see everything. Like my eyes were wide open. And I at that point, I didn't even need milk. I did not need milk. I jumped in, and I jumped into the deep end, head first. Like it was so powerful. I was so awake. My eyes were so wide. It was the most unbelievable experience that I had ever had, spiritually speaking. And that was at 24 years old. So now I'm pregnant for my daughter at the time. I don't have her until September the next month. This was in August that this happened. I didn't have her until September the next month. So now a couple weeks later, I ended up having an experience where I was in my room at the home, and I literally left the room, and I was transported to what I called at that time heaven, okay? It was a place that wasn't here. And I was in a place that it was so beautiful. It was so bright. The light was so bright. There was a bright light that the light was so bright that there was literally no darkness. And I say no darkness, you could not even put your hand on the ground, because I tested it. I tried to put my hand on the ground to make a shade. You know how you can make a shadow with your hand? There is literally no darkness there.
So this is some other kind of light. This is a radiance unlike common sunlight or electric light.
That's exactly right. Yes, it is a light that is a light that you will never see in the physical realm. It is a light that you will never see in the realm. I was walking with two people there. Two people were escorting me, walking me, and showing me, you know, where the place that I was at. Now, I don't know if these two people were angels. I don't know if it was Moses and Abraham. I don't know who they were. I was in such awe about the beauty of this place that the thoughts of my mind to ask these two people that are walking with me who they are was not even a thought in my mind. I didn't even care who they were. I was so happy to be where I was. Everything there. The flowers. The flowers there were flowers everywhere. Everywhere there was flowers. And as you walked, the flowers were nonstop, like following you, like literally following you. And you saw the beauty of the flower the entire time, like you couldn't walk past the flower. The flowers were like always in your direction, no matter what way you were looking. And the colors of the flowers were like, they were translucent is the only way that I can describe it. The flowers were like crystals, but they were so many different, multiple colors that it was the most beautiful thing that I had ever seen. There was smells there. The smells were the most unbelievably amazing smells. You were just mesmerized. You literally were mesmerized with just the smell. It was the most beautiful fragrance that you could ever smell. Like it, there is no way that I would ever be able to tell you exactly how wonderful this place was, because there is literally no description for it. There's no description. It was beautiful. It was this bright light that it was just it was so warm, and it just drew you in. You were just drawn into this light, and it was just an amazing experience. And I would never ever be able to put it in words to really truly describe the experience that I had when I went to this place that, like I said, at that time, I called it heaven. It could have been paradise. I don't know. I don't know exactly where I was, but I left that place. I was transported, like instantaneously. I was transported right back into the bed where I was at. And I knew what just happened to me. I knew that I just left the room, went somewhere, and I came back, and I felt like my whole body was glowing. When I came back, and now I'm back at the house in the home, I felt like I was glowing. I literally felt like I was glowing. All I wanted to do was tell all the other girls what had just happened to me, but I didn't know how to explain it. I was so I was so mesmerized by what I had just experienced. I didn't even have words for it. It was that amazing. Like, it was that beautiful. It was that, there's no words to describe it truly. Well, I ended up that day, it ended up being like 2 or 3 hours had went by, and I still felt the glow. I couldn't even speak. I literally couldn't speak. It was like I was still experiencing it, but now I'm back in the real world. And I ended up coming out of my shell, and I ended up talking to some of the other girls and telling them what I had went through and this, that, and the other. And the experience that I got from telling other people was, I felt like, and this is my own personal feelings, I felt like they didn't believe what I was saying. I felt like the group girls that were there, they did not believe what I was saying. And I ended up finding that I experienced that feeling, or I experienced that pretty much anywhere that I went, because after I was able to speak, I had this new understanding of the world. I had this new understanding where I knew that these people are lost. Everybody, the whole world, all the people in the world are lost, and they need to know that God is real. Like, I had this new understanding when I came back of the reality of how real God was and how real heaven was, or paradise, or whatever it was, how real it was. And I had this new overwhelming compassion for people, where I would just, I would cry, like, thinking about how lost all these people were. And when I was finally able to leave the home, I went to, because at the home, I wasn't allowed to have visitors unless it was like my parents or something like that. So I couldn't have friends or anything come over, because the house was, it was anonymous, or not anonymous, where, you know, we weren't allowed to advertise the home and tell people where it was, because there were women in there that were running from people that could hurt them.
Sure.
You understand what I'm saying? Not anonymous, but what I'm saying.
Incognito.
So, right, incognito. So when I got out of the house, the only thing that I wanted to do was go to every bit of my family, every bit of my friends, everybody that I knew, anybody that I could possibly talk to, and tell them, God is real. He's real, you know, and you have to surrender your life. And I was a maniac. Like, I am not kidding when I say I was a maniac. I was a maniac. It was so real after that experience of surrendering my life and having the visual of the veil taken over my eyes, and then going actually to heaven or wherever I was, and experiencing that experience that I literally, all my friends cut me out of their life. Let me just put it this way, okay? All my friends, I had not one friend left in my life. They all thought I had lost my mind. They all thought I was crazy. My family didn't want to be around me. Nobody wanted to be around me. I even, at one point, I called, there was a thing going on the radio station down there, which is 88.7 Way FM. It's a Christian radio station. And they were doing a thing where they were raising money for their radio station, and they are allowing people to call in and give a testimony.
You may contact us at Jackson Snyder Presents at this email address, veroyahad@gmail.com. That is veroyahad@gmail.com. And let me remind you, you are listening to Jackson Snyder Presents with your host tonight, Bogdan G. Schruumkoff. Thank you for listening. We'll be right back. Jackson Snyder Present is back. Join us now for more of this interesting discussion.
There was a thing going on the radio station down there, which is 88.7 Way FM. It's a Christian radio station. And they were doing a thing where they were raising money for their radio station, and they are allowing people to call in and give a testimony. So I thought, oh, this will be so wonderful because I'll be able to tell a whole bunch of people, you know, what happened to me and how I went to heaven, you know. And so I called and I gave my whole testimony on live radio, and literally the radio station guy, you could tell with his voice that he was weirded out and probably didn't believe what I said, the way that he responded. It wasn't like he was like, oh, wow, that what an amazing experience. He was like, oh, yeah, okay, that was a nice story. You know what I mean? Like, I could tell the guy didn't believe me. Like, nobody believed me. They all thought I was crazy. Like, I was so on fire after that experience and knew that God was real and heaven was a real place, you know, paradise or whatever it was, whatever the experience was, I knew at that point that I knew. And it didn't matter who I went to. It didn't matter who I talked to. Nobody really believed what I said, and everybody pretty much cut me out of their life. I had no friends at the time. I had nobody at the time. So it ended up being something that I decided at that point that I wouldn't be so vocal, I guess you could say, about what was going on in my life anymore, because I'm not making any friends. I've scared off all my friends. Nobody likes me now. They all think I'm crazy and that
Well, I think we lost her for the moment. But what it sounds like to me there with the guy at the radio station, you know, a lot of those radio stations that have Christian programming are run by Baptists and fundamentalists, sometimes evangelicals, and especially Reformed. And they teach that such manifestations as that are of the devil. And I think that comes pretty close to an unpardonable sin, attributing the things of the Father, the things of Messiah, to the devil. I think a lot of those people just were taught that way, and they never saw any kind of manifestations. And so to see them, because it's not in their church experience or their religious purview, that this person is crazy and is full of the devil. So that's one of the reasons one Baptist church I attended a couple times down here a long time ago decided to invite me not to come back. I had a talk with the pastor after a message when he condemned stuff like that. I came back the next night and he started condemning me. So he just laid it out to me. You know, you people are of the devil. These things you talk about. He was talking about manifestations are of the devil in that second sermon. He did it just for me, I'm sure.
Are you there?
Yeah, until they get it. Yes.
It happens again. I don't have the best service. I'm way out in the middle of nowhere right now, so I don't have the best service.
The devil cut you off.
I don't know. The enemy just does not want me to get out my message. I'll tell you that.
Not.
So where did I end at?
You ended up with the guy at the radio station. Didn't believe
so the guy at the radio station, I just felt, I could tell with the tone of his voice, there was no excitement, you know, because I'm ecstatic telling the story. And this man had no excitement at all at the Christian radio station. So I could tell that he didn't believe what I said. And I know that I'm not trying to like judge people or anything like that, but you can obviously tell by somebody's body language of how, you know, how they feel about something. So it wasn't a positive thing, and I ended up losing every friend that I had at the time. Nobody believed me, and I was the crazy person. And in fact, later on in life, one of my high school friends that I was friends with since the 9th grade of high school, she ended up cutting me out of her life, and we didn't speak at that time for another probably 6 or 7 years at that point, because she had cut me out too. She didn't know what happened to me, and we ended up like meeting again later on in life, I guess at a grocery store or something. I can't remember how we ended up meeting up again, but then she started talking to me again, so now we're friends again. And I was picking up her daughters and bringing them to school with my kids, because they all went to the same school and she needed help. So I was bringing her kids to school and dropping them off at the end of the day. And her daughters told me, my mom said that you're crazy and not anything that you have to say. And I just chuckled about it, because I knew she felt that way about me after I had told all my friends, you know, to surrender to God and that he's real, and told them my whole heaven experience. You know, they all cut me out of their life. So I didn't care. All I cared about at that point was that I had these 2 little girls in my car, and I would be able to tell them everything they needed to know about the truth. So I didn't care what her mom was saying. I was just so happy to tell these girls, you know, I would be telling them, stay away from boys, save your purity. Like I would be telling them everything, whatever the Holy Spirit gave me at that time. But so it ended up, I'm going to be honest with you, it ended up stifling me out. It stifled me out because it ended up being something that seemed to push people away from me rather than draw them in. They just could not comprehend what I was saying, because it was so not worldly, I guess, and it was so.
You were speaking a different language.
I was definitely to them speaking a different language, and they didn't want to be a part of that language that I was speaking, basically. So it stifled me out. I'll be honest with you. I have talked to my children about my heaven experience. I've talked to random strangers out of the blue about my heaven experience, but it's not what it was when it happened back then. Like, I could not keep my mouth shut. It was such a powerful moment. And so now my next experience that I want to talk about is my oldest son, who's 26 now. This was when I got out of the home, and I ended up moving into my own apartment at that time. I lived in just like a little, what is it called? It was just like a little 1-bedroom apartment. It was a little tiny duplex, and one side was an efficiency type apartment, and the other side was a 1-bedroom apartment. And I had the 1-bedroom apartment. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I said a studio apartment. I know that only because I've been looking for that.
Yes, the studio is exactly what it was. One side was a studio and one was just a 1-bedroom apartment. So I had the 1-bedroom apartment, and when you went out my back door, there was a swimming pool, and then on the left-hand side of my duplex thing was the main house where the owners lived. So the pool was like a shared area, but we had our own space basically. So my landlords lived next door, like literally right next door. And so anyways, there was a swimming pool out back. And my daughter at that point now was 8 months old. And my son was a little over 3 years old. He had just turned 3 in December. And this specific time that I'm about to tell you it happened in March. So he had just turned 3 years old in December. So it ended up, my oldest brother, the one that I told you, all that stuff that I went through, he ended up moving next door into the studio apartment. And so now my brother's living next door to me, like literally one wall separating us, basically. And so he was a chatterbox. He's the kind of person, he'll talk your ear off, he'll have a whole conversation with you, he'll hog all your time, and it's all about him. It's his me time, and you can't get a word in. It's just, listen to me, I have a million things I got to tell you right now that aren't important. and you got to listen. Well, I mean, I felt, I was intimidated by my brother, so I felt like I could never tell him, no, I'm busy, I got to do something, when, I was still intimidated by him. And so it ended up that day, he came home from work, the baby was sleeping for nap time, and my son, at that time we called him Artie, his name's Arthur, we called him Artie, was playing in the yard right outside the back door of the place. And so my brother comes in and he starts having this conversation about some girl and this, that, and the other, and he couldn't stop talking about it. So I'm standing with my back door wide open, and my brother's standing in front. So I'm facing the inside of the apartment. My son's behind me, and I'm facing my brother, and he's just gabbing and gabbing and gabbing. And I'm like, in my head, I'm thinking, okay, I'm done with this conversation kind of a thing, but I stood there and still listened to him. So we got into this conversation where it was probably about a half an hour to 45 minutes long, and the only thing that stopped the conversation is the baby finally woke up from nap time, and she started to cry to let me know, hey, I'm awake in here, So I was like, okay, well, I got to go get the baby, and that stopped our conversation. And I said, let me check on Artie real quick first, and then I'll get the baby. So I turn around and I look over my shoulder, and my son is floating face first in the swimming pool. He went into the swimming pool. There was no fence around the swimming pool. So
I knew you were going to say that, and I just knew it. I knew you were going to say that you found the child in the pool.
Yep, he was in the swimming pool, and he was floating face first in the swimming pool. And I immediately just like, the feelings of the rush of the feeling of seeing your child in that kind of position is the most horrible, horrible experience to have to experience. Me and my brother instantly ran straight over to the swimming pool and pulled him out of the water. And I don't know if anybody here has experienced a person that has drowned, but my son was 3 years old. He might have weighed, 40 pounds at the most. But when somebody drowns, it's like their whole entire body fills up with water. So it took both me and my brother to pull him out of the water because he was so heavy. His body was so heavy. And I really honestly can't say how long he was in that water. I have no idea how long. I know that I'm pretty sure that when a person drowns, they first go to the bottom first before they come back up to the top. As far as I know, that's how it works. I don't know because I only saw him at the top of the water. And I was down on my knees, sitting on my legs, on my knees, and my brother puts my dead child in my arms, like cradle style. And I'm looking at my dead son, and his skin is white, a ghost. His lips, his eyelids, his fingers, all of them, everything was blue. And I literally had no idea how to do CPR. I never learned nothing like that. I never knew CPR. My brother looks down and sees the situation, and he took off running. Now, when he took off running, I assumed that he probably had some sort of drugs in his apartment, and he took off running because he knew the police were going to come soon, and he didn't want to get caught with drugs. So I thought he just left me. I was there now holding my child who was dead in my arms. He had no heartbeat. He had no pulse. I checked his heartbeat. I checked for a pulse. I knew how to do that, and he didn't have a heartbeat, so I assumed he didn't have a pulse. I'm assuming that if he doesn't have a heartbeat, he doesn't have a pulse, but he didn't have a heartbeat. He was dead. This little boy was dead, and it was obvious. He looked like a dead person. And So my brother takes off, and I'm the only one there now. I'm holding my child in my arms, and I have no idea what to do. Now, I don't know if you've seen a movie where in this movie you'll see like in a certain scenery where somebody looks up and the hallway will all of a sudden stretch out where it's far away. Like the vision of a person, when they look up, all of a sudden the end of the hallway isn't here anymore. It's way out. You know, it goes boo, shoo, 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 and it's far away. Well, that really happens to you in real life. I looked up, and even though I was in a neighborhood full of houses all around me, when I looked up, it looked like all of a sudden everything and everybody was so far away from me that there is no way if I screamed anybody would hear me. I felt like nobody would hear me because my vision had just made everything look like it was so far away. So in that moment, the only thing that I could think of doing was looking up to the sky and screaming out to God, because I knew that was my only option at that point. And I screamed out to the Father, and I said, please show me what to do. You know, in my hysterical voice, I was obviously hysterical. I'm like, please show me what to do, you know. And literally, an audible voice spoke to me. A literal audible voice spoke to me and led me through CPR to bring my son to life. It told me right away, it said to open up his mouth, plug his nose, and breathe into his mouth. And if you've ever breathed into a drowned victim, when you blow into their mouth, it's like you're holding a straw in your cup and you're blowing and going blah, 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 blah. That's all. I breathed in his mouth, and it was and I took I moved back, and as soon as I did that, water started rushing out. I'm talking like a river out of his mouth, it seemed like, but I could have seen this wrong, I don't know, but it looked like water was coming out of his ears, it looked like water was coming out of his nose, water was coming out of his mouth, but it was like this rushing river of water. And the voice told me to put your hand on his chest, and just go 1, 2, 3. And when I did 1, 2, 3, my little boy's eyes opened and they rolled into the back of his head. When his eyes rolled back into his head, immediately I heard another voice that says, that's it. He's truly dead now. And as soon as I heard that, I freaked out. I started screaming with the most hysterical, horrendous scream. I screamed and just literally lost my mind. But one of the things that I want to say is that when that other voice spoke to me, I literally felt like I was connected to the Father, and all of a sudden my spirit went, as soon as fear came in, and I listened to that other voice, and literally fear came in, I literally felt my body disconnect from the other voice, what I say was the Father. The Father was speaking to me and giving me instructions. I literally felt my body disconnect from the Father, and now I'm engulfed by this fear that I am now obviously portraying out loud in, where everybody could see me. I was screaming and freaking out and hysterical. I lost my mind when that had happened. And so what ended up happening is my brother didn't take off to leave me. My brother actually went and got a phone and called 911. So I didn't know this. And so the ambulance ended up showing up. And by the time the ambulance got there, when his eyes rolled back in the head, he was actually coming back alive. And I didn't realize that. So he slowly, you know, in my hysteric, I'm screaming, not realizing that my son is now coming back alive. I was so hysterical that I didn't even realize he's actually coming back alive. He just took a breath and now he's breathing and he's coming back to life. And as he came back to life, as I'm screaming hysterically, he started making noise, and the noise is what stopped me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he's back alive, you know, and I'm freaking out. He was back alive. And my brother came back out at that time. And when he came back out, it was like within a minute or two, the ambulance showed up and came over and then took over the job. They ended up helicopter flying him to the children's hospital. And he ended up being in the hospital for like 3 days. But when they did tests on him to test him for whatever they test him for when somebody drowns, everything came back 100%, like he had not even drowned. Like he had not even been a drowned victim. Everything was 100%.
That's remarkable.
So, yes, it is. And that was such I could not wrap my head. The thing about that situation, I was in shock. I was in shock for probably a good month or two, maybe even 3 months, to be honest with you, from that situation. That was a very, very shocking situation for me. I was so happy, so thankful that I had my little boy back, but the feeling, the emotions that I had to go through and deal with were very hard emotions to have to now process, if that makes sense. So it took me a little while to go over that, but the one thing that I could not wrap my head around is that there was a audible voice that spoke to me, and when that other voice spoke to me, I literally felt myself disconnect from the Father and connect with this evil, like, dark spirit. Like it was, I couldn't wrap my head around that. I could not wrap my head around it because it was such a physical feeling in the real realm. It was such an audible, clear voice from both voices that spoke to me that it took me a long time truly to try to wrap my head around that whole experience. It was quite an experience, and I talked to a few people about what I did, and people don't seem to receive things in the supernatural. If you want me to be honest with you, people do not receive things that happen in the supernatural very well. And when I saw the few people that I did tell my experience to, how it seemed to not affect them, you know, in a positive way, I guess you could say. It didn't affect them in a positive way. It kind of just stifled, you know, stuff like that just kind of stifled me out. And I really didn't talk about things that made people not like me, basically, because I really had no life. I really had no friends. I really just, my kids were my life. And that's really all that I focused on.
Well, you were driving everybody crazy.
Yeah, it was. I was driving everybody crazy. So that was my second supernatural experience.
Oh, yes, my friends. At this juncture, I must announce that we are out of time, but we'll continue this search for the perfect answer when we come back in the next segment, probably tomorrow night. So stay tuned. Appreciate you being on board. I love to be with you these nights, especially because I just don't have any friends. Too busy editing audio all the time.